Boa tarde, eu sou Rosário Carvalho, sou a gerente da delegação do Porto e diretora do Departamento de Sócios da Câmara de Comércio e Indústria Luso-Alemã. Muito obrigada pela vossa participação e bem-vindos a mais um webinar Members for Members, um novo serviço da Câmara de Comércio e Indústria Luso-Alemã. Hoje convidamos-vos a conhecer a nossa associada Business Keeper. Agradecemos à Business Keeper a disponibilidade para nos dar a conhecer a sua atividade e partilhar connosco a sua experiência numa temática tão pertinente sobre soluções de informática para whistleblowing e compliance. Lembro que este webinar está a ser gravado e que os vossos microfones serão agora desligados. Agradeço também que desliguem as vossas câmaras para melhorar a qualidade da comunicação. No final da apresentação está previsto um momento para perguntas e respostas. Poderão colocar as vossas questões no chat e sem mais demoras vou passar a palavra ao Murray. Murray, bitte, ich gebe dir das Wort.
Erstmal vielen Dank an die Mannschaft innerhalb der Handelskammer für die Organisation vom Webinar von heute. Sehr beeindruckend Ihre Organisation. Und jetzt werde ich zum Englisch rübergehen. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure for us to be with you today. Without further ado, I am going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see my my cover slide here with the theme of the next 60 minutes. I should probably start by saying that we would like this to be a little bit interactive. You do have the ability to post questions, but in order to keep some structure, we're going to deal with the questions at the end. So Marcel is going to moderate some Q&A for us towards the end of this this webinar today. Let me begin just by a few introductory comments about the topic of whistleblowing and why I personally am so passionate about this topic. I've been working in compliance since 2009, so around 12 years now. And prior to that, I was working as a lawyer in the UK, Australia, and France. For me, one of the key historical points for the compliance industry was the 1st of November 1991, when the United States introduced the Federal Sentencing Guidelines, which set out for, I believe, the first time, the concept of judicial credit for having an effective compliance program. Now, the term effective is very much a term of art. The idea is not to have a symbolic program, not to have a beautiful manual which nobody reads. The idea is to have a program which is woven into the fabric of your organization, a living, breathing ethics and compliance program to benefit your organization and all the men and women who work within your organization. So I would very much place whistleblowing as the keystone at the heart of an effective ethics and compliance program. There is more and more enforcement action and more judicial regulatory attention on these kind of issues. We have been tracking for a number of years the level of financial penalties for violations of international anti-corruption laws. And for a number of years, these have been around the $1 billion US dollar mark. Last year, we saw the two highest in history. We saw the Goldman Sachs penalty of about 3 billion, and we saw the Airbus penalty from the French, British, and US authorities of around 2 billion. So there is more and more appetite for pursuing organizations that get this wrong. And as we will see today, there is more and more incentive for organizations to get this right, both in terms of best practice to make your organization better, to drive the reputation, the attractiveness of your business, but also legal requirements to require you to have certain practices and certain systems in place. By way of a quick introduction, my name is Murray Granger. I am British, based between Spain and Portugal as country manager for Business Keeper. Business Keeper we will introduce in a bit more detail in a moment. I have the honour since last December of being a guest speaker at Nova School of Law on whistleblowing and compliance communications. Very important for our presence in the Portuguese market, and that's a great pleasure. I founded a business called Impact on Integrity España, providing consulting in the Spanish market for ethics and compliance. And I previously worked, as I say, as a compliance officer and a lawyer in a number of different jurisdictions, and I worked very closely with the Ethics and Compliance Officer Association as chair of their Global Business Interest Group. Marcel.
Thank you very much, Murray. Bom, faço uma pequena introdução em português, já que estamos aqui rodeados de portugueses. Meu nome é Marcel Solanas, sou um brasileiro criminólogo especializado em Corporate Compliance. Levo trabalhando com Murray desde faz um par de anos e com a Business Keeper também desde o ano passado, faz mais ou menos um ano já. Crescendo o mercado principalmente ibérico, então entre também, como o Murray falou, entre Espanha e Portugal. E sou auditor também da ISO 37001 na Anti-Bribery Management Systems. E já cedo a palavra para o Murray continuar com a apresentação. Muito obrigado. E qualquer pergunta, por favor, façam no chat e eu vou levá-las a Murray no final, em português, em inglês ou incluso alemão. Obrigado.
Obrigado, Marcel. Okay, quick introduction of Business Keeper. We have been specialized in the whistleblowing solution business for 20 years now. We are just over 100 employees with 4 European centers: Berlin, Paris, Madrid, and Lisbon. We started off serving the public sector, and if you look at the lowest line here in the client references, you will see various police anti-corruption hotlines, competition agencies, financial markets regulators, justice bodies, data protection agencies, child welfare agencies, and anti-doping bodies for sport. That remains a very important theme to the Business Keeper client base, although nowadays most of our business is in the private sector, covering all of the different industries that you can see here. We provide solutions for companies large and small, so there are obviously many more than simply the ones that you see included on this slide here. Within our solutions, we have incident reporting, which is our secure web-based electronic whistleblowing system operated in 180 countries around the world and 75 different languages. We also have the voice intake when there is demand from customers for a telephone intake solution. There's an interesting cultural piece here because we have discovered from our customers that voice intake, telephone intake, is less and less demanded in European markets. We're seeing more demand there from Latin America and from North America. Happy, obviously, to go into further detail about why that might be, but I can just say that the solution is fully available in any language in any country. We have the case management, which is our more powerful module for the management by larger institutions, larger organizations of investigations resulting from compliance reporting. We have third party, which is our due diligence tool for business partners, because as you may know, there is more and more compliance risk that sits outside your own organization, not just within the employee base of your employee population. And finally, business approvals, which is a simple solution for the recording and approval of gifts, hospitality, donations, sponsorships, and so forth. Maybe just to set the context a little bit for the Portuguese market, and we're going to talk about some of the legal developments a little bit later. But I think this is a great moment for Portugal. As we all know, Portugal currently occupies the presidency of the Council of the European Union, which puts a lot more attention on Portugal at a time when the European Union is being challenged to its core. Post-Brexit, as we know, but we're in the middle still of the COVID crisis. Aside from the enormous personal and family struggle and suffering that many people are experiencing, we've of course got financial aspects. We've got the COVID response package at European level with a fund of 750 billion euros that has to be administered, with Portugal very much in the driving seat for that. From a compliance perspective, wherever there are large amounts of government funds being handed out, we can expect large amounts of fraud and misconduct. So that perhaps brings that into sharper focus as well. We've also got still an immigration crisis with refugees landing on the shores of Europe. And we've seen various initiatives where Portugal is very much stepping up to the mark, with at least 2 summits in Oporto planned for later this year, one concerning the EU-India relations and one being the European Social Summit. So I would see this very much as a time of opportunity for Portugal and for the reputation of Portugal as a country. These are the topics that we're going to cover in the webinar today. We're going to look at some cultural aspects, some historical aspects as well, some linguistic aspects. We're going to talk about how you call your whistleblowing system, because there are some best practices that we can share with you. We're going to focus on the EU Whistleblower Protection Directive, which will come into law in Portugal during 2021, and we'll show you a little bit about the Business Keeper solutions and give you an invitation for further information at a later date if that would be helpful. But when we're talking about whistleblowing, I just want to introduce the concept of willingness to speak up. And this is really at the heart of what we're trying to do within organizations with effective ethics and compliance programs. You're trying to create the conditions where people have the maximum amount of trust to come forward internally with information or concerns. They are not expected to come forward with a legally watertight dossier and investigation. They are simply asked to have the confidence to come forward and share a concern, a suspicion, where they've seen something that might not be right, where they've received an instruction that might not be in the best interest of their organization. One example I like to give of this when I'm delivering training on this topic is an example of a junior cyclist, where during the Tour de France, for example, the junior cyclist on a successful cycling team receives an instruction from the lead cyclist one morning to go down the road and collect a bag of medication. Now, at that point, I would ask the question, would that person be expected to speak up? They may have certain concerns about what is the medication. They don't have more information about what the medication is, but it seems a bit strange that they're being asked to go down the road and collect pills. So clearly, as usual in this sort of situation, more questions need to be asked. But the point here is it's quite difficult for a junior member of a sports team to speak up against the powerful team leader. Now, clearly that person could go to the team doctor, they could go to the press, they could go to the race authorities. I doubt the team has a compliance officer, but they could speak up to somebody who might be able to support them in that respect. Let's take that now across into a company or a public institution. It can be very difficult for a junior member of one of the teams, when they see something that is not right, to actually speak up. And therefore, what we need to do as compliance officers, we need to encourage people to have the confidence to speak up without fear of retaliation. So this is an ongoing, constant challenge. It applies in the world of sport, it applies in the world of business, it applies in the public sector as well. So that's where I would place the challenge of effective whistleblowing. Now, in terms of culture, I've heard a number of times from friends and colleagues in the Portuguese market that in Portugal, we don't really want to hear about the bad cases. We'd rather have silence, that's perhaps more comfortable. But actually, in international markets, that's extremely dangerous, because you can find that if a scandal emerges, you might find not only legal sanction as a result of that sanction, of that action that wasn't corrected at an early stage, and you can also find yourself, potentially more damaging, being prohibited from engaging in public competition where there is taxpayer money involved, whether that's in Portugal, in the United States, or in another country. There is, of course, also negative terminology around whistleblowing in many European languages and many European cultures. We might have the phrases such as chibo and bufo, where you're really going back to the culture of the playground in preschool, where nobody wants to be the person to report on their fellow student to the teacher in the class. But when you move that into a corporate environment as grown-ups, you do want people to speak up and to overcome any sort of psychological reluctance they might have to speak up in the best interests of the organization. Now, I spent more than 10 years working in Toulouse in the southwest of France. And when I was training and communicating around whistleblowing in the French culture, it didn't really matter what words I used. The words that were received and the concepts that were heard from me were quite different. In French culture, you've got some very deep-seated historical roots around whistleblowing. Believe it or not, 1789, this goes back to the French Revolution, where people would write lettres de cachet, so they would write denunciation letters to the authorities about their fellow citizens, where the consequence was that they were taken away, arrested, and guillotined. In Nazi-occupied France during World War II, there were 3 million lettres de cachet written by French citizens denouncing their fellow Frenchmen to the occupying power. So just imagine the deep historical, cultural, psychological roots of that kind of experience when we start talking about corporate whistleblowing. We have consistent messaging to give to encourage people to get over that baggage, to get over that hurdle in order to be ready and willing and trustful to speak up about issues of concern within the organization that employs them. Now, there is better news. The Institute of Business Ethics conducts every couple of years a national ethics survey. And the latest one I have for Portugal is dated 2019. And they found in their data that in Portugal, 49% of people who observe misconduct in an organization would not report it. That is higher than the EU average of 43%. I'm not sure I know exactly why it's higher. It may be cultural. It may be that there are less developed compliance programs, because at the present there is not a specific compliance law in Portugal. But it's worth noting that the reluctance to report at the moment in Portugal is higher than the European average. On the other hand, they also found that 85% of people said that honesty was practiced in daily business operations in Portugal. Sorry, I've got an echo. I don't know if somebody needs to mute their microphone, please. And they also said 28% of cases were misreporting working hours, 38% were abusive behavior, and 52% inappropriate or unethical treatment in the workplace. Now, all of those three categories, misreporting, abusive behavior, unethical treatment, was 2019. This was pre-COVID. I think COVID and the remote working conditions and all the stresses that people are under probably only exacerbate and make those statistics worse when we finally see the 2021 data. So we need to be alert. Let me go briefly to the United States, because there is often a comment made that compliance has its origins in the Anglo-Saxon world. I think that's probably true to an extent, but it's certainly not a get out of jail free card or an excuse to say that it does not equally apply in many, many other European and other countries around the world. I've mentioned already the federal sentencing guidelines. You've also got the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act 1977, and quite a lot of commentary and guidance to that, which has informed topics around corruption, anti-bribery, compliance in many, many countries around the world. And this document, which has actually been updated more recently than this, so the latest version was updated in June 2020, is my favorite reference point in terms of an international standard for what good looks like. So this is the guide from the Criminal Division of the DOJ, the Department of Justice, from the United States, as to how to evaluate corporate compliance programs. So this is a document which we can send you the link with the materials afterwards from the Chamber of Commerce. This is structured in 3 sections around the following questions. Number 1, is the compliance program well designed? So this is the whiteboard with the theory before you put anything into practice. Number 2, is the program applied earnestly and in good faith? Which is to say, is it adequately resourced and are people empowered so that the program functions effectively? And number 3, does it work in practice? So the authorities, the regulator, the enforcers, are saying here that when they're investigating a company for potential non-compliance, they're not very interested in the theory. They don't want to read your policies. What they want to do is take a practical approach. Have you woven your ethics and compliance program into the fabric of your organization? And they give one very practical example, which I'd like to share. They're saying if they go into a company and they leave the compliance office, they walk down the corridor, they go to an unrelated department, they speak to a junior colleague in that other department, and they say to that other colleague, they say, have you heard of the compliance program? Have you read the code of conduct? Do you know where to find a copy of the policy for anti-corruption? Has it been translated into your language? Has your manager ever spoken to you about the importance of ethics? Because those questions will give a subjective perspective from somebody within the organization as to whether the messages have reached them. So it's a very practical approach from the US authorities about whether this type of program is embedded within the organization. Now, coming back here to Europe, slightly closer to home. This was a statement from the EU going back 6 years now. That EU institutions welcome whistleblowing to make sure that serious conduct or wrongdoing in the EU administration is brought to light, and we will protect whistleblowers against retaliation. Again, retaliation, the single biggest barrier to people speaking up and to effective ethics and compliance in organizations. It takes many different forms, hard and soft retaliation, but anything that we can do to reduce the fear of retaliation improves the quality of our ethics and compliance programs, and we get more value from our whistleblowing systems. Now, terminology in terms of compliance programs. The name you choose will define whether you win trust in your organization. So what you're talking about here is a speak up system, but it begins with people raising issues. They can raise them to the hotline, the helpline, again, however you choose to use the terminology. Very often a hotline is deemed to be a telephone line. I wouldn't say that has to be the case. For me, an electronic system is just as valid a hotline or a helpline as any other. Equally, we've done some research to show that if you have an effective whistleblowing system, it actually encourages a culture of transparency, and it encourages people to speak up through other channels as well. They're more likely to speak to their supervisor. They're more likely to speak to human resources. They're more likely to speak to the legal team. It may be the data team. It may be the specific manager concerned. People are more likely to speak up because you've got such a system, and people are being encouraged to use such a system within the workplace. So you can be creative around the naming. It can be a helpline, an open line, an ethics line, whatever fits with your corporate vocabulary, because I can assure you that the authorities, when they are assessing, whether it's by the US guidelines here or any other new Portuguese standard. They're looking at substance over form. In other words, they're looking at what does the whistleblowing program consist of? What are the communications? What training's been done? How easy is it to use? Is it secure, and does it meet the conditions of the European Directive? So be creative. Now, coming to the directive itself. This is an absolute game changer, not only for whistleblowing, but for compliance programs in organizations. As you'll see some of the detail that we're going to run just in a moment. If in the past, it was possible for managers in organizations who did not want the compliance team to find out certain information about possible misconduct. If there was a bribery scheme going on in Angola and they did not want compliance and legal to start asking questions about anti-corruption protocols, for example, they could perhaps get away with it. Post EU directive to be implemented this year, that will not be possible. Because if somebody has information inside your organization and they're not being listened to, or the conditions are not there for them to come forward internally, they can go outside your organization, take that information to the press, the regulator, the competition, and have full legal protection. That's why I describe this as an absolute game changer for the compliance industry as well as for whistleblowing programs. But let's look slightly more specifically at the directive. This applies to all organizations with more than 50 employees. Also to organizations which have sales turnover in excess of 10 million euros. It's not both of those conditions, it's any one of those conditions. Okay, so you can have 50 employees and turnover of 1 million, or you can have 10 employees and turnover of 15 million. You're covered. It affects the whole financial sector, and it affects all firms with the risk of money laundering or terrorist financing. It also affects the entire public sector, which is obviously very important in the Portuguese market, and that includes all municipalities with population in excess of 10,000 people. So the scope here is extremely wide. I should also say that the directive, which has to be implemented within 2 years of December 2019, when it was approved by the European Parliament, sets the minimum floor, so the minimum conditions. Any country in Europe can go further. So they can insist on anonymity, for example, which is presented in the directive as an option for each member state to decide the approach they wish to take. It would certainly be considered best practice, by the way, but they can go further than this. So they can make this any company above 25 employees, for example. They can decide what period of time they're going to give as a grace period for enforcement. They can be more aggressive than the directive. So these are the minimum conditions which have to be implemented this year in Portugal. The term whistleblower under the directive is defined very, very broadly. So if in the past it was arguable that it covered only your full-time employees, that is no longer the case. Whistleblower receiving full legal protection under the directive now includes former employees who, believe me, will have no hesitation in coming forward and speaking. It includes candidates who come for an interview and don't get the job. To me, that's one of the more surprising ones. It includes your subcontractors, your suppliers, arguably your clients. It includes family members of the whistleblower who in some cases have suffered retaliation. It also includes any colleagues who encourage the whistleblower to come forward and speak up. Any of the people within that category should be given access to your whistleblowing channel because they will have this full legal protection. And here's the requirement that you must create a secure channel, and you must then manage it actively in order that people can come forward, because if they don't, if you don't provide such a channel or you don't manage it properly, people can go outside your organization. There is a strict ban on retaliation, which I've talked about already, extremely important. There is also a strict ban on any attempt to identify the identity of the whistleblower. The example here on the right from Barclays. This was Jez Staley, the CEO, who, when there was a whistleblowing report, which he was upset about, tried to identify the identity of the anonymous whistleblower. Now, he was then fined 14% of his pay packet, £600,000, still left a large amount of money, so I don't think that hurt him too much, perhaps reduced his tax bill a little, you could argue. But imagine what that did to the integrity of the compliance program and the whistleblowing program within Barclays. Who is going to come forward tomorrow if the person who came forward yesterday has been subjected to a witch hunt to find his identity by the chief executive? It doesn't make sense. It's not good practice. It's now strictly illegal. There is also a requirement to give legal and emotional support and to give feedback to the whistleblower, initially within 7 days to acknowledge receipt of the whistleblowing report, and then within 3 months when the case is supposed to be resolved. How do you give feedback to a whistleblower if that person not only is maintaining confidentiality, but has chosen to remain anonymous? Well, with the Business Keeper solution, we have that solved because we have a secure postbox within the secure perimeter of the Business Keeper system, which enables you as the compliance team within the organization to give the secure feedback and engage in the dialogue with the whistleblower without their identity being known to anybody. Okay. Now, this also means that because of the ban on identifying the whistleblower, any kind of corporate email channel, which historically is what many organizations have used, is no longer adequate under the directive when implemented. In other words, this is probably the main reason why so many organizations are currently looking at upgrading to a secure standard such as the Business Keeper system. I should mention as well that there is an expectation under the directive that each country creates a national independent authority. So this would be something like a Portuguese national whistleblower protection agency, which will be safeguarding the implementation of the directive. So the law will be implemented, but they are then enforcing the law and making sure that organizations are doing what they're supposed to do, perhaps providing some kind of guidance as well, but they would be leading on the financial penalties for non-compliance. We talked about opportunities for Portugal. For me, this is a massive opportunity because we've seen lots of very good examples across Europe of national agencies that have been set up, data protection agencies, the Agence Française Anticorruption in the French market for specifically for bribery and corruption, which have been very well staffed, very well funded, and are actually feared in the market. So that is really putting together what I would describe as effective compliance and effective enforcement, because they have created a proper national champion, an organization which is empowered to sit behind such a law. Of course, if it's done properly as well, you will then be in a position to levy financial penalties for non-compliance. If we look at what some of the financial penalties are that have been levied in France, in the UK, in Germany, certainly in the United States, they can be enormous sums of money. And that's money that the Portuguese revenue can collect in lieu, perhaps, of taxes and other fundraising. So this is an opportunity for the Portuguese government. Now, as I say, the law has to be implemented in all 27 countries. Prior to December this year. Countries are moving at different speeds. We see here, and this is an open source link that you're welcome to click on. We see that 21 of the 27 are in progress with their implementation. In Portugal, as of late October last year, we had seen the public consultation on the strategy to combat bribery and corruption. So that was concluded, and I think we are still waiting for the announcement of the new Portuguese law, which is expected to pick up 3 things. It's expected to pick up the whistleblowing requirements of the directive as a minimum and possibly go further. It's expected to pick up the results of the bribery and corruption consultation exercise, and we expect that it will also have the concept of effective corporate compliance defense, which again goes back to my concept from 1991 from the federal sentencing guidelines in the United States, where they introduced this concept that we also have with adequate procedures under the UK Bribery Act, with the Código Penal here in the Spanish market as well, and in certain other national regimes, Sapandos in the French market, in Germany, Italy, Law 231. There are many international standards for this. But picking up a defence for Portuguese companies if they're accused of non-compliance, when they are able to demonstrate that they've got effective compliance programs with, as I say, whistleblowing at the heart of that. That may also be combined with further implementation around the anti-money laundering directives, which I know have been implemented at different dates in different countries, including Portugal. So there's probably a bit further to go in that respect as well. Let me also just make one comment that the directive does not specifically require that there be any financial incentives for whistleblowers. And you may be familiar with this concept of whistleblowing bounty and a debate in the market as to whether that is actually helpful. Now, arguably, this goes back to the culture issue, because there is a kind of European perspective, although there are different views on this, that you should not be offering financial rewards for whistleblowers to come forwards, because people feel that encourages inappropriate whistleblowing, or people's motivation is not perhaps pure, should we say. There are different views on that, and my personal view, not the view necessarily of Business Keeper, is that financial incentives are very good at motivating people in many different contexts and might actually be very helpful in terms of whistleblowing. We also have financial incentives around whistleblowing, not just from the United States, where the SEC pays a percentage of the recovered financial penalty to a whistleblower if you meet certain standards, but the conditions are very, very tight. And actually, I always say to people, you actually have a better chance of playing the lottery than of going to the SEC with information, because they don't make it very easy. But if you do get a payout, it's likely to be a substantial sum of millions of dollars. You also have similar schemes in many other countries around the world in respect of reporting on tax evasion, reporting on public police bribery, reporting on breaches of law, as well as corruption. And that holds in Canada, in various Asian countries such as Vietnam and Malaysia, certain African countries, certain Latin American countries, including, I believe, Brazil, but also in certain European countries, including Montenegro, Ukraine, and certain others. So we do actually have this concept of financial bounty already within Europe. And I don't think it's going to be implemented in Portugal or any other countries particularly quickly, or certainly not initially when the directive comes into national law. Turning just briefly before we go to Q&A to Business Keeper, how we are able to help you with our technology and our experience focused in this topic for the last 20 years. We already saw our 5 specific solutions, with whistleblowing very much being at the heart of our solution, but they're 5 consistent solutions, the same look and feel, the same security standard. And we have customers who just have the incident reporting. We have other customers who have a combination up to all 5. And as I say, we have 20 years of experience working with our customers on these important topics. Our solutions are flexible. So we adapt the solution to the specifics of customers' organizations. So their own logo, their own landing page, their own categories, that's very important, so that the reporting is focused and of a high quality, the information that the specific customer wishes to collect, and then only the customer has access to that information. It's an all-in-one solution, so it's future-proof. If there's any updates for any national laws, any content changes on the platform of the customer, or any technical updates, that's all included in the solution and all included in the existing pricing. The security of the information, being a German company, information security and data privacy are very much in the DNA of Business Keeper. So we've deliberately positioned ourselves as the #1 in the market for data privacy and information security. As I say, we're the only provider in the world who has no possible access to the customer compliance data. Specifically, that means that any compliance allegations, reports, investigations can only be seen by the investigation team, the compliance team on the side of the customer. And our system is fully available. We're now at 75 plus languages. It's available any time of day or night, anywhere in the world. All that's needed is an internet connection. So we're making this as easy as possible to implement quickly, cost efficiently, and safely for our customers. If anybody would like to follow up with us after this webinar, we'd love to hear from you. We have an office on Avenida de Liberdade in Lisbon, and we're regularly, as soon as the lockdown permits, in both Lisbon or Porto, and otherwise we're working like everybody else remotely, online and fully functional. With that, I will turn to Marcel, and we're very happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Murray. Well, in the chat, I think we have not questions yet. I don't know if anyone want to just pop up and show the face.
I think Marcel, actually, sorry, it says for me the meeting chat is muted. So I don't know if we can, I don't know if that just means we don't get alerts or if people have not posted any message on there as yet, but let me just post a test. See if that comes up. Yeah, that seems to.
Yeah.
No, I think it's muted.
No, comes up, Murray.
It does come up. I can't see it on my system, but yeah, okay. So anybody's very welcome to post a question in writing or to unmute your microphone and turn your camera on and directly ask a question of myself or Marcel, English or Portuguese or German as you prefer. Do we have any questions? Right, I think we get to go home early then. This is your opportunity.
Look, Murray won. Okay, from Rui Costa. Hi, is this legislation mandatory across Europe this year?
Okay, thank you very much, Rui. Yes. The longer answer is that the directive was approved at European Parliament level in December 19, with, as usual, a 2-year implementation period in all 27 member states. So it has to be implemented in all 27 countries before December 2021, which is why this is such a hot topic this year.
Yes. Good. Let's see if anyone else. Okay, Murray, I think that's it for questions.
Okay.
Comments also, if anyone wants to comment something. Okay, Rui comment. Thank you. Maybe I got it wrong, so sorry for that, but will this be mandatory to the companies or not?
Yes, so it's mandatory for all companies with more than 50 employees or sales in excess of 10 million euro or financial sector or exposed to money laundering or terrorist financing risk and the full public sector.
Okay, and Ricardo Ray has a question in Portuguese.
Hi, Ricardo.
Boa tarde. Os bancos em Portugal foram obrigados a implementar este canal, sendo a crítica destas instituições o anonimato do canal. Logo, o problema em Portugal será cultural? I don't know if you get it, Murray.
You can give me your best translation. I think I get 95% of it.
Yeah, so, well, the problem with the channels in the bank institutions was the anonymization. And Ricardo asked if the anonymization problem in Portugal is cultural.
Okay. So there is a history of anonymization in Portugal, and until a few years ago, you had a position from the Portuguese Data Protection Agency that they did not permit anonymity in whistleblowing systems. So our customers who were using the system in Portugal had a slightly different configuration because they could not have anonymity. That changed, and the Portuguese Data Protection Agency clarified 2 or 3 years ago now, I think, that there was no prohibition on anonymity in Portugal, and that brings it into line with international best practice. For the banks, the anti-money laundering directives, I think it's the 5th directive, actually requires that financial institutions have anonymous whistleblowing systems. So banks are already required to have those. Is it cultural? Well, Ricardo, I'm sure, is more of an expert than I am on cultural factors in Portugal. I say that with all humility. I think in Latin markets, whistleblowing generally hits some of the cultural hurdles and challenges that I talked about in the French market, and some of the linguistic issues in terms of the sort of the Chibo mindset. But we're now in an interconnected global marketplace where you can't afford to not have transparency and light shining on dark places in organizations. So I wouldn't sort of simply say, oh, it's cultural. I think maybe there are challenges which need to be overcome in the communication strategy around whistleblowing systems and indeed compliance programs.
Very good, Murray. Another one from João Peña Garcia. We always assume that a whistleblowing has, in general, a valid reason to inform some events. What if a whistleblower just wants to raise problems and point the finger to a former colleague? Does the European Directive protect the companies of false whistleblowing?
Okay, so the directive is in respect of good faith whistleblowing, reporting, prohibiting retaliation, giving the legal protection. In reality, it's very important to reinforce that there is very, very little bad faith reporting that takes place. The problem is that when it does happen, it causes a lot of damage to the trust within the organization. So I think this is a bit of a red herring, a bit of a distraction, because it happens so infrequently. And even with our system, you have to go into the system, you have to read the initial information, select the category of your report, fill in some security information, even remaining anonymous, and fill in the report, which is going to take you around 20 plus minutes. If somebody wants to cause problems and create trouble, there are much quicker and more easy ways to do it. So even having a secure system improves the quality of your reporting and makes this even less likely.
Great. And I think that's it. Ricardo and João have said thank you, Murray. Very good.
Okay, so I think that the Chamber of Commerce afterwards will circulate the material. We can also provide the link to the Institute of Business Ethics survey on business ethics in Portugal and to the Department of Justice guidelines, which are currently in English. But I'll give the final palabra to Rosario and die Mannschaft in Porto.
Ok, danke, Murray, obrigada, Marcel. Penso que damos por terminado este webinar. Espero que tenha sido útil para todos os participantes e qualquer questão o Murray já deixou ficar o contacto dele, poderá ser colocada diretamente ou através da câmara, poderão entrar em contacto connosco e nós obviamente que fazemos chegar todas as questões e todos os assuntos à Business Keeper. Estamos ao inteiro dispor para qualquer questão, também a Câmara, os nossos associados têm os nossos contactos. Desejamos um resto de boa tarde e até à próxima, que penso será muito em breve. Boa tarde, Murray, obrigada, e Marcel também, muito obrigada.
Muito obrigado, Rosário, obrigado a todos por participar. Uma ótima tarde.
Adeus, boa tarde.
Adeus.
Obrigado, boa tarde. Adeus.